Iran has launched a new wave of attacks targeting natural gas facilities as well as at least one oil refinery in the Gulf Arab states. Now, this is coming after Israel launched an assault on Iran's South Pars natural gas field.
Today, Iranian state television, citing an unnamed senior official, said Iran had responded negatively to the proposal and detailed 5 demands to end the war, including a halt to aggression and assassinations by the U.S. and Israel, plus complete control over the Strait of Hormuz.
In central Tel Aviv this morning, the ripped-up, blown-apart aftermath of an Iranian attack. Israeli authorities say an Iranian missile or missile fragment with more than 200 pounds of explosives hit this apartment block. Walls, now windows, into what used to be homes.
The part that should scare you is not the softer language. It is what happened underneath it. While the public heard pause, talks, and productive signals, Israel moved in the other direction and approved a fresh Iran target list, which means the people running this war do not believe the old one finished anything. That is the layer beneath the clips. 15,000 bombs is supposed to sound like the end of a map, the point where not much should still be standing, hiding, or functioning. But if you need a new target list after 15,000 bombs, then the bombing did not close the war. It pushed the war into a nastier phase, where what survives is more buried, more adaptive, and more likely to drag this thing outward instead of letting it end. That is why the title matters exactly as written. A new target list this late is not routine. It means the first phase burned through visible launchers, exposed sites, and pre-planned coordinates. And now the war is hunting the harder layer underneath. Underground missile bunkers, hardened systems, buried production, and the kind of targets that survived the first wave, because they were built for the first wave. And that one phrase matters more than most headlines do. Quality strategic targets means this is no longer just about how much you can hit. It is about what still matters enough to hit next. What still launches, what still commands, what still moves money, fuel, weapons, and fear. And what can still keep Iran and Hezbollah in the fight after the easy damage has already been done. Now the real meaning lands. If about 90% of the pre-war designated targets were already hit by March 19th, then the new list is the story, not the old bombing. Because once the original map is mostly exhausted, every new approval is an admission that the war survived the destruction of the first target bank and had to generate a second reason to continue. The audience clicked for one answer, so here it is. Fast. Israel approved a new Iran target list, 15,000 bombs later, because the first phase did huge damage without producing a clean ending. Stay with me, because the most dangerous part is not the number of bombs already dropped. It is the kind of targets that come after 15,000 bombs fail to end the war. If you're the kind of viewer who wants the layer beneath the headline instead of the recycled TV version, subscribe now, because this is where the story stops being about spectacle and starts being about selection. And selection is where this war gets darker. Put the military picture next to the political one, and you see the trap immediately. Even the reporting on negotiations is built around uncertainty, missing details, contradictory claims, and basic questions about whether the talks are real, who is carrying messages, and whether anyone involved is serious. When the political endgame is that blurry, the military target list gets bigger. Because air power starts filling a vacuum diplomacy has not filled. That contradiction is not side noise, it is the engine. One side talks about ending the war. Iran keeps signaling defiance. Strikes continue across Iran, Israel, and Gulf states, and every actor tries to improve its position before any settlement exists, which is exactly how a war grows, while leaders keep using the language of restraint. There is also a basic military truth hiding inside all this. Bombing is fastest at the beginning, when the map is full of things you already know. It gets slower when the map empties out, when targets move underground, when launch systems disperse, when command networks reroute, and when what is left is more important than what was destroyed first. That is why 15,000 bombs can be a sign of power and a sign of failure at the same time. Power, because the scale is enormous. Failure, because if the war still needs a new list after that, then scale alone did not force the end state the bombing was supposed to create. And once the new list starts interacting with infrastructure, the danger gets much bigger than military bases and launch crews. A missile landing near the Orol Rabin power plant after threats against Israeli energy infrastructure tells you this. War is drifting towards systems that keep civilian life running. That is when a target list stops sounding like military jargon and starts sounding like a warning about electricity, fuel, transport, and how much social pain each side thinks the other can absorb. You can feel the shape of the war changing right there. Early war says hit what can hit you back. Later war says hit what keeps the other side functioning. And once that shift begins, even accurate strikes become politically radioactive, because every attack now carries a bigger chance of widening fear, widening displacement, and widening the number of people who live inside the consequences. And the weapons themselves are already widening the human footprint of the war. Reuters described cluster munition missiles carrying about 24 submunitions, dispersing high above the ground into dozens of impact points, which means one missile that leaks through can instantly turn into many scenes of damage instead of one. That is how a war stops feeling like a line of strikes and starts feeling like the cloud of risk hanging over entire neighborhoods. That is also why the human anchor of this story cannot be treated like background footage. In Israel, apartment blocks are ripped open. In Lebanon, civilians are trapped inside another cycle of loss and displacement. In Iran, bombing, fear, and repression collide in a way that makes daily life smaller, not freer, and leaves ordinary people carrying the cost of strategic theories they never voted for. And that is where a lot of coverage goes numb, because it becomes a scoreboard. More bombs, more launches, more intercepts, more official statements. But the title does not promise you a scoreboard. It promises a reason, and the reason is simple. After this much firepower, the war is still growing, because the original violence did not solve the deeper problem of what still survives and what still threatens. This is the point where the political fantasy starts cracking. Even after devastating strikes, Reuters reported there is no certainty Iran's government will fall despite war. That matters because once regime collapse is uncertain, once deterrence is incomplete, once retaliation continues, and once bargaining is unsettled, every side can justify another round by saying the previous round came close but not close. Enough. That is how wars learn to continue. First, the stated goal is to break launch capacity, then it is to hunt bunkers, then it is to hit infrastructure tied to war-making, then it is to increase leverage before talks, then it is to punish rejection of talks, then it is to keep pressure on proxies. By the time all of that is running at once, the war is no longer moving toward one clean objective, it is feeding several half-finished ones at the same time. That is why the Phase 1 pack kept circling the same conclusion from different angles. No clear end state for the war. Oil moved above $110 a barrel. Thousands of vessels were stranded in the Gulf. Additional Marines were moving toward the region, and the strategic radius of the conflict kept expanding. So the new target list is not just about Iran. It is about a war that now affects energy, shipping, military deployments, and the nerves of governments far beyond the immediate strike map. And then diplomacy hardens again in public. If a proposal is answered negatively, if demands stay maximalist, and if control over the Strait of Hormuz remains central to the bargaining position, the military logic does not cool down. It gets harsher, because every failed opening is instantly converted into proof that the existing target list was not too broad. It was still too limited. So when you ask, did the title promise get fulfilled? This is the missing piece. The war still grows not because 15,000 bombs were meaningless. They were not. The war still grows because bombing can destroy huge amounts of capability without producing closure. And when closure does not arrive, the map repopulates with harder, deeper, and more politically explosive targets. That is why even Washington's language sounds split in half. One signal says, wind down. Another signal says, delay, reposition, pressure, and keep the military card alive. And in that gap between softer words and harder options, the battlefield keeps moving. Because nobody wants to be the first actor to look weak, exposed, or eager for a bad deal. There's also an information war sitting on top of the real one. One headline says productive talks, another says no negotiations. One side frames new targets as strategic precision, the other side frames survival itself as victory. But civilians do not live inside those phrases. They live inside sirens, smoke, shattered concrete, blacked out routes, and the slow realization that leaders can keep calling this leverage while families experience it as permanent instability. And this is where the title's final layer comes into focus. Even if someone imagines a narrower Iran track, an expanded push against Hezbollah means the conflict does not fold neatly back into one theater. It spills, loops, and reopens fronts, which means a new Iran target list is not just about targets in Iran, it is also about how one front keeps feeding the logic of another. That matters because it explains why the war feels bigger than any single day's footage. The battlefield is not just growing in distance, it is growing in function. Iran, Hezbollah, energy routes, Gulf states, air defenses, shipping lanes, and political messaging are all getting braided together. And once that happens, every new target list is also a list of new ways the war can stay alive. Listen to what that number really says. More than 400 ballistic missiles fired, a reported 92% interception rate, and yet the war still keeps finding ways to wound, scare, and widen. That is what happens when a conflict becomes durable. Enough to survive both offense and defense, both bombing and interception, both threats and counter-threats. And now we can answer the click reason in one clean sentence. Israel just approved a new Iran target list because 15,000 bombs damaged the first layer of the war. But the second layer is still alive. Underground systems, infrastructure pressure, proxy linkages, regional leverage, and unresolved political objectives. That is why the war still grows. Not because nothing changed, but because not enough changed to end it. If this breakdown is helping you see the story more clearly, hit subscribe and stay with this channel. Because the most important clue in wars like this is usually not the explosion you just watched. It is what gets added to the map after the explosion fails to settle the issue. And leave me a comment with the one thing you think leaders already know but still refuse to say out loud. That 15,000 bombs can destroy a lot more easily than they can define victory. Because once a war starts generating fresh target lists, after this much destruction, the most dangerous thing on the map may not be the next bunker or the next launcher. It may be the belief that one more round will finally do what all the previous rounds could not. So no, this is not a war winding down. This is a war changing shape. The old targets were not enough. The political outcome is not fixed, the region is not calm, and the battlefield is still producing new reasons to keep going. That is the whole point of the title. And that is why it should hit harder after the script than it did before the click. Israel just approved a new Iran target list. 15,000 bombs later, the war still grows. And the most frightening part is that the new list is proof the old one did not bring the end any side was hoping to claim. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next one.